Hi, everyone. Welcome back to our product update sessions with Magical. I'm so excited to have you here. Today, we're joined by Jeannie. Jeannie is one of our amazing product leaders who focuses on admin, governance, workspace, and making sure that large teams are able to get as much value as possible out of automation. Hi, Jeannie. Welcome.
Hi, Elon. Thanks so much for having me on this.
My pleasure. So we're going to jump right in and we're going to chat about to start just general kind of automation needs for larger teams. So I'm curious if you could describe kind of like what are those typical automation needs? What are some of the tasks that we see bigger teams looking to automate?
Yeah, I think a lot of times with larger companies and larger organizations, the needs come in really in large part three forms. So one is around scale, of course. So if they're getting the same types of repetitive tasks across a large number, so you can imagine they have a ton of different visitors, they need to scale that somehow and automate that experience. You'll see that that's when they look for that automation. You can even see it in the form of just having a lot of employees. So IT being one of the folks who will look for automations early because they're seeing a lot of these like repetitive, like turning on and off different types of access for so many people. So that's like where for sure like automations from bigger companies comes from like the scale piece. The second part is around consistency and accuracy. So you can imagine like if you need the data or the information that you're getting to be accurate, that would be where automations come in because then it introduces less human error and it allows for a better and easier checks and tests as well. And then lastly, I think the other thing is just the fact that even in a small company like ours, we have so many applications that we're all using. So it's like, how do you get that broader picture where the entire company can be speaking the same language about their customer, their business, like things like that. So being able to connect all these systems together so that they all say the same thing. So that's where automations come into. So you can see that, especially given larger companies who have a lot of internal tools that they build out for themselves. So how do those internal tools talk to maybe something that they bought out of the box, like a Salesforce or a Stripe or whatever it might be. And so, like a big part of the automations needs come in those forms of three, where it's like that need for scale, that need for accuracy and consistency, that need for that same language that they're speaking across different applications.
Yeah, I think that was a great framework to look at it. On the other hand, it's almost like the need to connect people with different applications efficiently and the need to connect people with people efficiently. Like those
Yeah.
are two of the kind of big problems that big teams especially feel. You touched on the bloat almost of applications that we see at big companies. How has
Yeah.
that changed over the past 5 years or so? Like, has that become more of an issue? Do we see more companies building out their own systems, like you mentioned?
Yeah, I think actually, so there are two parts. One is definitely the explosion in apps and the number of apps that companies are using has grown like just year over year. So for sure, that procurement and IT side like becomes really important in managing the access that different people have, especially when it comes to security, but then also in terms of just having the right idea of what's happening. So that's where you kind of see that friction too, is like, hey, no, my number says this, and say, no, like my understanding of the customer says this. So that's where you kind of get all these like variations and why there's a lot of promise in getting that right picture and a lot of that connecting all these different applications together. I think the other thing too is like there's more of that adoption of these smaller some of these like up and coming companies, so a lot less of that needing to build their own, but a lot of times there's also just legacy systems, right?
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I think when you start using an application, it becomes really sticky and hard to replace. I also thought the other interesting thing that you just shared was organizations, both especially larger ones, have these like legacy homegrown apps that they've built. When I was at a previous company, we built our own email automation tool. Like
Mhm.
that's like there's so many, but we still built our own homegrown email automation tool. And on the other hand, we were using really like unique one-off apps to solve specific problems. and across the org, there's so many. So I think there's like both of those things happening at once for bigger companies now, where before I feel like there were legacy systems and then there was just like manual things. Now it's legacy systems and those small providers that are solving the solution, and just finding a way to connect them all is a big pain for big teams.
There's more of that model of why don't small team or teams can actually empower themselves to just like get what they need, and then it kind of bubbles back up to the bigger buyer or like the procurement team or the IT team. And so you also see a lot of that just coming from the fact that more startups and companies are trying to introduce that like try before you buy, and that product-led growth type of model. And so you do see a lot of people also just adopting because it helps them in the short run, and then they bubble it up back to like the larger buyer.
Yeah, I think that's a great insight that like the product-led motion has changed things a lot for
Yeah.
enterprises. Maybe I'm curious if you can give us some examples that you've seen big teams where there's a similar repetitive task that's being automated across, very diverse teams like sales versus support or even like HR. Are there overlap? Is there kind of a shared pain point?
So on one hand, it's definitely like the building blocks of like what is an automation. So on one hand, you'll see that different job functions will have their own use cases, as you know, but they share like building blocks of it. So it could be in the form of repetitive messaging. We see that across many different people who are teams that are client facing, and they all have their own use case, but messaging underlies like what it is that they're trying to automate away. It
Just
could even
you explain messaging for our audience. Like, what do we mean by that?
Yeah, it could be in terms of just like repetitive, consistent or on-brand messaging that you're sending to each client. So we can see it in the form of like, for example, sales or customer support, where they need to introduce a link that they want to tell like a specific user that they're addressing. So for some salespeople, maybe they have an audience of marketers. And so they want to bring in some pieces around marketing that's only pertinent to marketers, but then they also have maybe an audience of salespeople, and so they need to bring in a separate selection of links or messaging that's pertinent to salespeople. And they're doing this across a number of these types of users, and so they need to frame these messaging with some customization, but the underlying message is still fairly the same. So that's where the repetitive part comes in. And then for customer support, it's like maybe they start off the conversation the same way before then they move into more customization. And so that's kind of what we're seeing when it comes to automating messaging, is like when you're repeating or using like some sort of templates to say the same thing across a number of people.
Totally. Okay, so like messaging being kind of communication in a written format is
Yes.
underpinning everyone's work in that like support has to send chats
Yeah.
to their customers. Sales is interacting with people over email or Slack or however sales
Totally.
interacts, and like HR or recruiting on LinkedIn, even sales on LinkedIn. So yeah, I could see how there's those bridges that are drawn between
Yeah,
different things that all like everyone needs to communicate. Okay,
exactly.
so now let's take a step back and think about as larger teams are kind of deciding who to work with. And like we mentioned, there's like this PLG motion.
Mhm.
How do orgs decide what tools to use to automate repetitive tasks?
Yeah, I think there are two parts. One is, of course, the table stakes pieces, and you see that all the time across a lot of enterprise organizations. So they always will want the security and administrative controls. And a lot of that goes back again to one, like the scale, consistency, accuracy part. And then the other part also being security, making sure that they have on their charter to make sure that people are using and accessing tools safely. And that's where like the part around the enterprise piece, where we have offer things like single sign-on, we offer like user provisioning that's like one secure, but then also helps like IT or admins be able to have more control. And then also things around like new tools. So they have to be on top of like new technology like AI, and what do they have to understand about it so that their workforce can actually use it, one, effectively, but then also two, safely. So there's definitely that piece. But then the other piece is A lot of times orgs, they're trying to just be as effective. They have to be aware of the budget they have on hand and how they can actually disperse that effectively. And so that's where tools that can continue to give them value over time. So there's not just, okay, great, it like answers like a very single modular use case, but that it can actually grow with them and grow in value. So that's where they see a lot of value too. It's like, oh, great, that's something that we'll probably be needing soon. So I'm glad that you're addressing that. It's something, those are the two big things. So one, obviously security, but then two, having knowing that the company is going to be growing with value as well.
Yeah, I think that's a great way to look at it. It's almost like, does it solve our problem? Is it secure? And is there ROI on the
Yeah,
problem? And
exactly.
continuing to measure that. One of the things that we're definitely seeing is SSO and user provisioning with SCIM just becoming super standard. And I think that's more and more because as PLG motions proliferate, orgs need a way to continue to manage these things, especially bigger ones that have tons of different tools. They need to
Yeah,
have vendors that they vetted and have gone through a security review for and have dedicated teams focusing on admin and governance to really work with them because otherwise they expose themselves to risk.
exactly. Exactly.
We mentioned a couple of these key features or key elements of like an admin suite. Can you share a little bit more about what SSO and SCIM or SCIM are and why they're so important to IT leaders or teams at bigger companies?
Yeah, for sure. Definitely both offer like the security aspects because then they can authenticate a lot of their users just in one place. So they don't have to worry about different people coming into their system or getting access to tools. And so it's really ensuring that the right people are getting the right access to tools and the right permissioning as well. If you're saying like a big organization have a ton of tools, then it makes sense that you want this single sign-on so that you have one place to see who has access. But then also for provisioning, because so many people, like if you have so many employees who are onboarding, offboarding, needing different types of tools, just managing all of that for security reasons, but for also their own workflow, like the IT or admin side, becomes especially important because then that's extra time that you have to either turn on or off like access for people if there isn't a user provisioning in place. And that's why it's super important that we do offer some of these things because then it makes not only like the lives for admins easier, but also it makes it just way more secure, right? So they can actually trust the fact that, okay, great, I don't need to worry about the type of access that my team has or doesn't have, and that external folks have or don't have with my organization, and they can just manage it in one place and can trust in the latest technology that's there.
That's awesome. Yeah, I think those specific things, so like single sign-on and SCIM, are things that IT leaders like have to have as their checkbox items for the reasons you just mentioned. And that's why we built them, like, right? That's why Magical saw this need for large teams using our automation tools for messaging or data entry or
Yeah,
sourcing. And we realized that, we need to make sure this is easy to provision and to manage across a large team. The other
exactly.
thing that we saw bubble up is this need for kind of a team manager or someone who we call the team admin to manage content or other functionality. Can you tell us a little bit more about what is Magical's vision for like a team admin in our workspace or in the workspace of Magical?
Yeah, for sure. So a biggest thing that we hear from team managers all the time and folks who have created teams is really two factors. One is getting that consistency and on brand. You might be managing quite a large team and they're all using Magical to automate, which is amazing. But at the same time, this gives you some sense of control over the legality of the messaging that they're using, the consistency in the branding that your other teams may have worked so hard, like in terms of brand marketing or whichever, to pull together, or just making sure that they're getting the latest information. Product is building all the time. They want to make sure they're getting that information across, especially given how challenging either on the customer support side or sales side it is to make sure that all these bespoke requests or asks are addressed timely. So that's where that consistency and branding becomes really important, and where team admins want to be able to manage that content and manage what gets shared and making sure that the latest and best gets shared. The second part is just access. So it's like ensuring that either the right people have the right access again. So that's where granular permissions becomes important. So we right now currently have admins and team members, and they have different access and capabilities. But over time, we'll have like more granular ones. Maybe it's that you can view this, but not necessarily edit. Different ways to make sure that you're getting the most out of the tool, and that you have a lot of control over it. So that's the biggest thing, is just making sure admins and different people they deem having controls get the right controls, and then the other folks can still do their work without feeling blocked, but at least have the right and consistent and secure way to do so.
Yeah, I think that's a great point, the consistency and branding piece. And even from a training perspective, like if you're onboarding a new rep who doesn't know how to, or sales rep, sorry, who doesn't know the messaging, who doesn't know like when to use what message, having really great templates stored in Magical just makes it super easy to onboard someone to your team. They automatically get access to all of those templates at once. And the other thing that I've heard that's really interesting, and again, this is from conversations with customer support or sales reps, is they like to have their own personal touch to things. So having both those like consistent and branded messages in one folder, and then their own personal templates for messages, and their own little like their Calendly link or things like that they like to have access to quickly, they can still store those things and have both personal and company oriented tools.
100%. Yeah. And we see also a lot of times they draw a lot of inspiration from just seeing what their teams have done. And then it's like, okay, great, I'm going to customize it in my own voice. And at the same time, they'll continue to reuse what they've made. And they are getting a lot of that value from their teammates by just seeing like, oh, shoot, we have this new product. How should I talk about it? Okay, let me just look quickly at this other template and then draw a lot of inspiration before I create my own.
One thing, people want to get as much use of automation and AI as possible, but especially big companies want to see compliance and a really trustworthy tool. One thing that we've recently invested in, and by we, I actually mean you, like you've led the charge on this, has been SOC 2 compliance, SOC 2 Type 2 compliance. And I'm wondering if you can share a little bit more with our audience. What does SOC 2 Type 2 compliance mean, and what does it mean to be certified for that?
Yeah, no, absolutely. So for us, it was really important that we have SOC 2 Type 2 compliance completed, and that we continue to comply with it over time. And the overtime part is important because you can always get a Type 1. It's a really snapshot into the systems and how you handle your customer data. But for us, it's like over time, we wanted to prove that we are investing and doing the work to make sure that customers feel safe about how we handle their data, how we handle our systems, and what kind of policies we have in place for our employees, so that it all works together to provide like a very secure experience. And so that's really important. The biggest thing that we've been asked, and that everyone has top of mind, is really around their customer data. On our end, we actually don't keep track of the content that you have within your templates per se, and we ensure that the right access to different types of customer data is as like a need to know basis. So like, for example, if there's something operationally broken, then we'll like investigate. But apart from that, we try to be as upfront as possible through our privacy policies, through requesting permissions from users for that different type of access. So for us, the SOC 2 is really around that customer data and bringing in that trust and doing that over time to ensure that it always looks good.
The other thing that we're definitely hearing, especially from larger companies or companies that maybe are in healthcare or finance that are more risk averse, is this wariness about generative AI and integration partners and exposure risk. So I'm wondering if you can shed some light on what you've heard from some of the enterprise leaders who've selected us for their automation partner, and how we've gone about helping them managing the exposure to that risk of.
Yeah, totally. A lot of enterprises are still investigating what makes sense in terms of AI and the impact it will have in their organization. And so there is, of course, still some hesitancy around fully adopting it, which totally makes sense. They should definitely do their own due diligence first before adopting that. And so for us, we do work in terms of not needing to have AI. A lot of the things that power the data entry piece or that power the template side actually doesn't require AI. But at the same time, we understand that AI can be such a game changer for a lot of users. And so we do have that as part of our offering because we know what a game changer it is for a lot of people. That said, when we work with enterprises, we give them this granular control over whether to offer AI for their users or not when it comes to Magical. So we actually offer a way to turn off the AI capabilities within Magical. And then when they have done their due diligence and they feel comfortable about the impact of AI, then they can also turn that back on. It's pretty granular and they can decide on that. So that's what we've worked on. And we've heard from a lot of enterprises for a long time. They're like, we really want to have that control. We're not ready yet. So it makes sense. And we wanted to like take them along that journey as well. And so that's what we do. And then the other side is like we do work closely with ensuring that the type of data that we do send to different third parties is in line with what we put in our security policies, things like that, and that we don't, and that we always like depict and actually showcase what we're doing with that data in our privacy policy and in any of our policies, so that users have a full transparency of how we handle their customer data.
Been super interesting to watch how different orgs approach it, like come in and ask for us to turn it off and then decide to turn it on later or the other way around. And I think just providing the options for large companies to manage it themselves is what gives them the peace of mind and at larger teams because they have different risk exposures that we don't know.
Yeah.
And also I wanted to clarify for our audience. So when we talk about our generative AI features, Magical has a couple, namely quick replies, which are like one-click buttons that you auto-generate a response to any email or message across, at this point, like 25 different places, like different messaging channels. There's smart suggestions, which automatically suggest which template to use for whatever message you're having a conversation with. And then we also have, the baseline generative AI, which we call AI Assist, that just says, you can put in a prompt and it'll write a message for you. And so what we do is we, again, like Jeannie said, we make access to those features not available for the users of an organization where it's not deemed to be a good fit or by their team.
Yeah.
Um, and this is kind of an interesting piece because, one of the things we're thinking about when we talk about large teams choosing a vendor, choosing an automation partner, is feedback and iteration and, working with startups of different sizes. I feel like this goes to show how much Magical values our user feedback and our customers' feedback. I'm curious if you can shed more light on how we look at relationships with our customers, with our users, and what makes Magical's customer support and experience so powerful.
Yeah, no, for sure. I think one thing is that we really take it seriously, our user feedback, and we welcome them through different channels, and we'll continue to introduce more ways to access and talk to our users and for them to get in touch with us. So definitely through emails, of course, through individuals throughout the companies, like yourself included, like all of us have definitely talked to different users and customers and different people who are interested in Magical. We also have our community, which we actually check like on a daily basis, and we make sure that those concerns are addressed as soon as possible. And we also, when we talk to like enterprise customers, we continue to have a line of communication with them, usually through whoever has worked with them consistently throughout the process of their buying cycle. And so they kind of get that consistency across the board. It's not like we like then switch them over to someone else and then continue to move them across a bunch of different teams. It's really like addressing their specific needs. We also look into like Slack channels with different people as well. So it really comes in a lot of forms, and it's what suits our users. And so they can really reach us in many ways.
Absolutely. And I think that's the benefit of working with an organization that's really nimble like ours, where we're able to adjust to your communication style as a partner. Okay, this is the kind of closing question. just maybe summarize some thoughts in this too, but what is the single most important piece of advice that you would give a large company or a large team looking for a messaging or data entry automation partner like Magical? What should they be considering in their evaluation?
Yeah, I think there's two parts. One is, of course, security is always important, and being able to have that granularity and control is really key. And I'm sure that's something they'll continue to look at. No need to even hear it from us ourselves. But the other thing too is really around, we talked about how there's going to be so many apps, and there continues to be so many apps that a lot of organizations are running. Scale so becomes is an issue where people find like automation being very necessary. And so it's really about flexibility. Are there tools that allow for a lot of flexibility so that it's not just a really technical person who has to build these bespoke workflows so that other employees can use it? Instead, is how do you empower each individual to be able to automate as they need within the guidance that you set for your company. And so that's where we can really come in, is that we offer a lot of flexibility. We work with a lot of different tools and applications. In fact, we work with pretty much any that are browser based. And the idea is that, okay, there's a lot of flexibility. Let's make sure the guidance piece is there and that the security part is there. And so that's what I would say is like really around, yeah, different users are going to have very bespoke way of using and automating and thinking through their workflow. And there's going to be a continuations of so many different applications your company's going to be using. So how do you make sure you're on top of that? And that's really around that flexibility piece, and then bringing in the guidance, which is where the big buyers and IT part comes in.
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head. I think our flexibility and the breadth of tools that we can
Yeah.
support is going to be a key distinguishing factor. And I think that, to your point, that's what large orgs should be looking for, is a tool that can work and integrate and move information across many different apps, not just one to one. Um, that was awesome. Jeannie, thank you so much for your time today. This has been super helpful and insightful. I'm sure tons of listeners will get a lot of value out of hearing your thoughts and the vision. And also, I think it's important for us to be transparent with our audience on why we're doing things, why we're building this kind of admin suite. So yeah, thank you. Thanks to all the viewers or listeners today. We look forward to the next one.
Thank
Bye.
you. Yeah.